Bienvenidos a Disrupt Everything, podcast series by Isra García. Reinvéntate a ti mismo y cambia lo que más te importa.
How about Estoicism in modern life? Some of you might have heard about the Estoicism, right? And how to be a Stoic, how to apply the Stoic learnings and lessons in today's world, and also, skepticism, which I think is another school in philosophy. And sometimes we just neglect what the past is giving to us, the story is showing us in this modern world, which sometimes it might be the question and it might be the answer also. As you know, as I'm talking in English, is because we have today an international guest. And as you might know also, I'm doing an experiment. I'm trying to live 50 days as an Stoic in the actual world, in today's world. And I think today we have a person who can bring this subject, this philosophy, this work on the real surface of today's world and explain us better how to navigate today a good life through Stoicism in 2019 and 20, I guess, and 21 too. We have today Massimo Pigliucci. Massimo, thank you for being here and thank you for taking the time for participating in Disrupt Everything podcast series.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
Massimo is a doctorate. He has a doctorate in genetics from the University of Ferrara, Italy, a PhD in biology from the University of Connecticut, and a PhD in philosophy of science from the University of Tennessee. He is also a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and of the Committee of Skeptical Inquiry. Massimo also writes for the Skeptical Inquirer on topics such as climate change denial, intelligent design, pseudoscience, and philosophy. He has also written for Philosophy Now and maintains, and I like because I'm a blog lover. He maintains a blog called Rationally Speaking. Massimo has written at least 11 books I can recall. Some of them are Making Sense of Evolution, the Extended Synthesis, Nonsense of Stills, How to Tell Science from Bunk, Answer for Aristotle, How Science and Philosophy Can Lead Us to a More Meaningful Life, Philosophy of Pseudoscience, Reconsidering a Demarcation Problem, and How to Be a Stoic, Using Ancient Philosophy to Live a Modern Life. Massimo became popularizer of Stoicism and one of its driving forces in Stoicism resurgence in the United States in the early 21st century. His 2015 essay for the New York Times on the topic has been one of the most shared articles up until date. Massimo, it's been a long journey, right?
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey. Let's put it that way. Yes.
Massimo is also a philosophy professor of the City College of New York, author of all these books and more than I don't know and I haven't read. And Massimo has also appeared on TED Talks sharing his experience about why Stoicism is a great toolkit for the modern world. Massimo, can you share with us your journey? I'm gonna put it that way: from zero to a Stoic, instead from zero to hero, from zero to Stoic.
That's a good question. I should say, by the way, that How to Be a Stoic is actually has been translated in Spanish, so your listeners can actually find the Spanish translation of it. Yeah, and
I'm gonna
also
put the book in the show notes.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's been an interesting journey. I mean, in terms of personal philosophy, I grew up Catholic because I grew up in Rome, so it's obvious that was the normal thing to do, basically. I left the church when I was in my teenage years because I was increasingly dissatisfied with the answers I was going to get from priests and other people about the questions that I was asking. And then for many years, I considered myself a psycho-humanist because psycho-humanism is this kind of general view of life that essentially says you can be a good person even without gods, that believes in sort of human rights and that sort of stuff. And psycho-humanism is fine, but it's not really a philosophy of life. It doesn't actually have it doesn't give you much of a guidance on how to live your life day to day. It's really more about sort of some very general and very genetic principles. And so it's kind of it wasn't very satisfying. But I just went along with it for many years until, of course, midlife crisis hit when I was in my 40s, and a number of things, personal things happened, like a divorce, a change of job, and my father died. The kind of stuff that happens to a lot of people, so nothing particularly horrible, but still something that I had to deal with, and something that sort of prompted this question of how do I think about this stuff? What sort of guidance can I get for dealing with the ups and downs of life? That was also coincidentally the time that I started studying philosophy seriously. So I was back into graduate school, getting my degree in philosophy. And one of the first courses that I took was on Plato. And it was a really interesting course. I mean, learned a lot of stuff, but that also kind of introduced me to what is called virtue ethics, which is this general approach to how to live your life that was popular in ancient Greece and Rome, and that was adopted by a number of ancient schools, from the Aristotelians to the Epicureans, etc. And I said, virtue ethics, that sounds interesting, because virtue ethics is about improving your character. It's about becoming a better human being. It's about paying attention to what you're doing and why you're doing it. So it's like, this is interesting. This is something that maybe I can work with. And so I started looking into virtue ethics. Now, the first stop when you look at virtue ethics usually is Aristotle. And I read the Nicomachean Ethics, which is Aristotle's major work on ethics. And it's like, it was interesting, but it really didn't grab me, because Aristotle is a little bit of an aristocrat in that sense. He thinks that in order to have a flourishing life, a life that is worth living, what the Greeks called the eudaimonic life, one has to not only work on your character and your virtues and stuff like that, but also you have to have a little bit of money and a little bit of good health and a little bit of even good looks, he says at some point. And he's like, all right, that excludes a lot of people from the eudaimonic life. That can't be right. So I moved to the next school within the virtue ethics sort of universe, which is the Epicureans. And Epicurus has a lot of good things to say about all sorts of topics. Particularly, I was struck by his treatment of friendship. He thought that friendship is the most important, certainly one of the most important things that mark a human life. I can relate to that. He also said that we shouldn't be afraid of death, because when she comes, we're not going to be there to feel anything. That struck a chord. He was not an atheist, but he clearly said that we shouldn't be afraid of the afterlife, because there's no such a thing, and that notions of the afterlife are stories that are made up by priests and politicians who want to control us. I said, wow, this is really interesting. On top of which, his metaphysical views were surprisingly modern, right? He was an atomist, so he thought that the universe is made of atoms that bump into each other in the void. It's like, all of this was really good. And then I hit the problem. See, according to the Epicureans, the highest good in life is to live without pain, particularly emotional pain. And in fact, they even thought that living without pain is the highest pleasure you can possibly achieve. Well, the problem is that they also canceled, therefore, to withdraw from social and political life, because, as we know, social and political life can be painful. And so why would you want to do that? And then that didn't work for me, because I think that a human life where you're not involved in politics, you're not involved in politics as in, the broader sense, not of caring about the polis, contributing to social life, contributing to, making this a better world. Without that, I don't think I can work with that sort of parameter. So much for Epicurus. So I was in that at that stage where I knew that the virtue ethics, I had this intuition that virtue ethics was the way to go, but the two types of virtue ethics that I tried were not particularly fit for me. And then one day on Twitter, of all places, I read this thing that says, "Help us celebrate Stoic Week." And I said, "What the heck is Stoic Week? And why would anybody want to celebrate the Stoics?" And I read Marco Aurelio when I was in college, and I even translated Séneca when I was in high school from Latin. But I never really put the two together, actually, as members of a unified kind of school of thought. And I thought, that's interesting. So I signed up for Stoic Week. Stoic Week happens every fall, usually in October or early November. And basically, it's a week during which you sort of try out to practice Stoicism. You download a booklet which has, the basics of Stoicism. It has some readings, assigned readings, and then it has some exercises, some meditations and some other stuff. And I said, let's do it. And it struck a chord immediately. As soon as I started reading, especially Epictetus, who I had never heard of before. This is a guy who was a major philosopher, not only in his own time in the 2nd century, but basically throughout the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance and into the early modern period. And yet he's not taught today, even in graduate school, even in philosophy graduate school. You never hear about Epictetus. So I heard of him for the first time during Stoic Week, and I downloaded immediately his full writings, the 4 books of the discourses and the small manual or handbook. And I just devoured the whole thing because Epictetus really spoke to me. He has a blunt way of talking to his students. He doesn't mince words. What he says is what he really means. He has an interesting sense of humor, both in terms of self-deprecation, but also he's also somewhat sarcastic towards some people. And so it's like, wow, this is my guy. So when I started reading Epictetus, I really got into it. And then at the end of the week, I decided to commit to continue this practice for another couple of months until the end of the year. And then when I got to the end of the year, I committed to practice for another year. And now here we are, more than 5 years later, and we're still talking about it. And
wow, what a journey! And what practices will you remark from all that you start following and the ones you follow right now?
Yeah, so that's a good question. With a friend of mine, Greg Lopez, we just published a book here in the United States, which I believe is coming out also in a Spanish translation. The book is called, in the American version, it's called A Handbook for New Stoics. Although for some bizarre reason, the English translation, as the British translation is Living Like a Stoic, and I think that's what's going to be. I think the Spanish translation is going to be Diario Estoico.
Sí, o Viviendo como un estoico.
Yeah, so something like that. And at any rate, so we wrote this book precisely because to answer the question you just posed, which is, what about exercise? What kind of exercises do Stoics do? And in the book we present 52, so that's a lot of exercises that are drawn from the writings of Epictetus, Marco Aurelio, and Seneca mostly, also from some of the other minor Stoics. And for each exercise, we also try to bring up to speed things up to speed with modern science. So we look at the literature in cognitive science or psychology and see which one of these exercises actually seems to work based on modern empirical evidence. But if we're talking about my favorite practices, this is much smaller number. I don't do 52 exercises because that would require a lot of time. Readers can try those exercises one by one and then see what works for them and what doesn't work. Because Stoicism is a flexible philosophy. There are some things that work for some people and other things that don't work for some people. So my favorite exercises are, one of the ones that I do pretty much every day is the so-called philosophical diary. Basically, this is inspired directly by Marco Aurelio's Meditations. The Meditations were his own philosophical diary, personal diary. Right? So he would. The way you do it is you pick a moment, usually in the evening after dinner, but before going to bed, and so you retire in a quiet place of your house or apartment, and for a few minutes you just write down your thoughts about what happened during the day. But I don't mean this as just a general diary, like, today I went to the party, or I went out for ice cream, something like that. I mean things that are ethically, morally salient. So you should go through your day, and for everything that had a moral component of some sort, you should ask yourself, what did you do right? What did you do wrong? And what you could do better the next time. So the reason to ask yourself, what did you do wrong, is not to sort of indulge in regret and, self-flagellate or anything like that. It's just to learn from your own mistakes. It's like, oh, okay, today I answered with an angry voice to an angry tone with one of my colleagues. Okay, that's not a good thing. So that's one thing that I want to be mindful of in the future. I need to stay away from that. You also ask yourself, what is it that you did right? Because not only it's good to appreciate the stuff that you did right, but also because that's where you want to move forward. So basically those two questions, what did you do wrong and what did you do right, give you kind of a set references, so that you, over time, you're trying to move away from the things you do wrong and toward more and more things to do right. The third question is, what could I do better next time? Well, that's because our lives are not actually as varied and as complicated as people sometimes think they are. We tend to do the same things day by day. You go to work, you see the same people. You have a family, you see the same people, and you interact in the similar situations. You have friends, and again, you go out with them, and you see them pretty much in the same situations. That means that if you pay attention to what you're doing, then the same situation is going to happen, or a similar situation is going to happen over and over and over. And so if you're mindful of the fact that, oh, well, today I didn't react well when my colleague was complaining about something, then now you know that the next time that the same colleague or somebody else at work complains in a similar way, then now you're prepared. Now you're paying attention. You're mindful of what's going to happen. So the philosophical diary is a way to do so, engage in critical self-reflection, to learn from your own mistakes and prepare for the future. And it's a really valuable tool. Modern cognitive science suggests that you do that by writing in the second person, so as if you were writing to a friend, right? So instead of saying, today I did this or that, you write things like, today you did this or that. And the reason for that trick is that it puts some distance, emotional distance between you and yourself, basically. It's like you were talking to yourself as a friend. And interestingly, that's exactly what Marco Aurelio does. The meditations is written in the second person. You keep saying, oh, you know that this or that happened, so why are you doing this or that, and so on. So that's one exercise. There are a number of others that I do on a regular basis. So let me give you a couple of other examples.
Yes, please.
One of the typical exercises is what is known as mild self-deprivation. So these are things like taking a cold shower, or fasting, or abstaining from drinking alcohol, or things like that for a certain period. And this is supposed to be mild self-deprivation. You're not supposed to starve yourself to death or anything like that, right? So it's just like, it means just you're skipping a meal or two, or maybe you go 24 hours without eating, or something like that. And the same with alcohol. I'm Italian, I'm Mediterranean. The notion of having dinner without a glass of wine is kind of inconceivable for me. But once in a while, exactly. But once or twice a week, you can do it. I mean, it's not a big deal. And now, why would you want to do that? That's the question. Why would you want to impose on yourself these kind of limitations? And the reason for that is because you do it with the kinds of things that you feel that you have a problem handling correctly. So if you tend to eat too much, then fasting is a good idea. And I'm not talking in order to lose weight, although that may actually happen. I'm talking about because you want to remind yourself that food is not, this all-encompassing thing that unless you have it in great quantity every time, you're going to die. You're not going to die. And you remind yourself of that, then you can remind yourself of the fact that you can easily stay without food for a meal or two. The same for alcohol. If you have a tendency to drink a little too much, I'm not talking about being alcoholic. If you're alcoholic, then you need professional help. But if you're just talking about I realize that I drink a little bit too much, on an average basis, then great, once or twice a week. Decide ahead of time that, okay, today, no alcohol at all. So these exercises are supposed to remind you of the fact that you can handle deprivation, that, you can be just fine sometimes without these things. It also is an exercise in reminding you just how good you normally have it, right? I mean, Séneca says, at one point, he says to his friend Lucilius, I went a couple of days without eating, and you wouldn't believe how wonderful was that soup with stale bread that I had, when I got back home. It's like, yeah, exactly. We tend to forget that we have a lot of things, good things in our life, that we don't appreciate because we take them for granted. So this is also, in a sense, an exercise in appreciation of the stuff you have in life. So that's 2 exercises. A third one that I like to do on a regular basis, whenever it's possible, is the sunrise meditation. So this is actually found in Marco Aurelius, and the Stoics actually got it from earlier on from the Pythagoreans. So this is a kind of meditation that is really, really sort of old. It's like millennia old. And what it is, hold on a second, let me something, because otherwise you're going to hear noise in the background. So what it is that the sunrise meditation is, you get up a little before sunrise, like half an hour or so before sunrise. You get to a spot where you can see the sun rising, if possible. I mean, if you live in a place where that's possible, or otherwise, something close. I mean, I live in New York. It's not easy to see the sunrise in New York, but there are a few spots where you can get pretty close, and then you just stay there, and quiet. You quiet for a few minutes. You just look at the sky, not directly at the sun, obviously, but just in the general direction, and you wait, because otherwise you're going to go blind. And then you wait, and you remind yourself that the notion here is to remind yourself that we are part of a greater cosmos. That too is a thing that we tend to forget, especially if you live in the city. Where there's a lot of stuff going on, where you sometimes don't even see stars at night because there's so many lights and things like that. So we tend to forget. We tend to get insulated and focused on our day-to-day life without, sort of reminding ourselves that we actually are living in a larger cosmos that have been going on for literally billions of years, and of which this particular instant and this particular place in the universe is a tiny, really tiny, small one. So it's a way to remind yourself of the connectedness, the connection that you have with the cosmos, and also to some extent to put your problems in perspective. Right? We all tend to be very sort of consumed with our day-to-day problems. But when you start stepping back for a minute and saying, no matter what happens to me today in my job, or today with, this or other problem, the sun is still going to rise tomorrow. It's still going to be there. It's like one of those things that's like relaxes you and puts things in a little bit of perspective. So those are 3 of my favorite exercises. But as I said, there's many more.
Thanks, Massimo, for giving us these crystal clear examples. What's been? I have to tell you that I'm every night when I'm going to go for a hot bath, relaxing hot bath, I put some of at least between 1 and 5 Stoic meditations in your podcast. So yeah, I'm learning so much because I'm writing down the reflection you said, every quote you mentioned from a philosopher. What's been your drive behind the book, How to Be a Stoic, and now the one you're launching? By the way, congratulations!
Thank you.
So what's been your drive behind the book and also the podcast?
Well, what happened, as I said, was that a few years ago, that when I encountered Stoicism, it really changed my life for the better. It gave me a kind of a moral compass to navigate life. I've become less sort of irritable, more focused on what I was doing, and paying more attention to the good things in my life, and trying to develop sort of an attitude of equanimity toward the bad things. And I figured, well, this is certainly going to be helpful to other people. So I wrote the first book, How to Be a Stoic, with the intention of speaking to people who were like me a few years earlier. If I would have loved to have something like How to Be a Stoic when I started out, because it would have gotten me on the initial steps of that journey. It would have told me, the book tells me what the basics are, what the history is, how to practice, what kind of problems Stoicism is helpful for, that sort of stuff. And so I wrote the book as if I were writing to myself in the past, essentially. And the results have been what I was hoping for. I mean, I had no expectations in terms of how well the book would do. I had no idea. This was new to me. The whole Stoicism thing was new to me, and I'd written, as you mentioned, several other books before, but most of them were academic, not really in the general public, with a couple of exceptions. Nonsense and Tilts was an exception. So I didn't really have much of an idea of what expectation of what was going to happen. And to my surprise, the book has been a success. It has sold very well. But more importantly, I get constant emails and letters from people who read the book and tell me that their life has improved as a result, that they're doing better with whatever their problems are. And that's something that is satisfying in and of itself. I mean, regardless of, more practical things like sales of the book or anything like that. It's like when you feel like your own philosophy, the philosophy you adopted for your own life, is actually going to be useful to other people because of something you've written or because of something you put out, as in the case of the podcast. That's just very good. It just makes you feel like you're actually helping others.
I love the word you used, equanimity, because as you are so thanks. I wish I could find something like How to Be a Stoic before, and people like you, because my life also will have been so easy, and as I discovered the Stoicism. So you are completely right, and I like the word you used, like equanimity. Word you use, equanimity, because it's so similar with some of the Buddhist teachings, and you say it. Yes. So I guess I don't know where I read it. You're saying that Stoicism and Buddhism share had some similarities, and this is what you really hook you at the beginning, right?
Yes, that's right. They share a lot of similarities when it comes to their ethics. So, in other words, when it comes to how to live your life and treat other people, they're very different in terms of their metaphysics. I mean, their view of the world is very different, right? Buddhism has this whole thing with karma and reincarnation. So there's nothing like that in Stoicism. The Stoics don't believe in the survival of the soul after death. But nevertheless, the important bit is that the ethics are very similar. And in fact, I was actually interested at some point in Buddhism. Buddhism is something, of course, that you keep hearing, even here in the West. It's very popular. Even here in New York, there's a major Buddhist temple. So I kind of thought of, on and off over the years of, well, maybe I should take a look into the Buddhism. And when I did, it was obviously interesting and obviously a useful philosophy of life, but the language was alien to me. I didn't grow up with that kind of culture, of course, with that kind of language, with those kind of concepts, and so it's kind of alien. It's like, I know what you're saying, but I'm just not feeling it. When I discovered Stoicism, the thing was, as I mentioned earlier, the reaction was completely different. I mean, it really hit a chord immediately. And I'm sure part of that is because I share the same sort of cultural background, the classic Greek and Roman cultural background that Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius and Seneca were writing from. But the two are very similar. In fact, very often I say that, if you want to have a general idea of what Stoicism is, you can think of it as the Western equivalent of Buddhism.
No, I like the idea. I always used to joke with my friends, saying that at some point Buddha and Zeno might have some beers together, because it was
that's right.
Yeah.
That's interesting you mentioned that, because some people have suggested a more direct connection, not between Buddhism and Stoicism, but between Buddhism and ancient Greek philosophy, because it turns out that Pyrrhus, who was a skeptic, not a Stoic, but another one of those Hellenistic schools, he was in India for several years, following Alexander the Great, because Alexander went to India, did his conquering there as well. And we know that Pyrrhus learned the local language and talked to Buddhist monks. Buddhism had just started at the time, like 200 years earlier. So it was a very new philosophy, and so it's possible that there had been some cross-pollination between the two, because we don't know exactly how much the Buddhist monks got from Pyrrhus in terms of Greek philosophy, or how much Pyrrhus got from the Buddhist monks. So it's possible that there was at least some connection and cross-fertilization, basically. Wow. Not directly with Stoicism, but definitely between Buddhism and ancient Greek philosophy.
Isn't amazing? Massimo, what change in behavior do you notice on students that embrace and practice Stoic philosophy? Because you are a philosophy professor, and also you've been teaching for a while, and also the book, the podcast, a lot of students. What's the change on behavior, which I think is pretty remarkable, at least to stop there and
I think that the two changes that I see more often, and that I've seen in myself, but I see also in my students, as well as in people that write to me after having read the book or after listening to the podcast, are one, the fact that people tend to be paying more attention to what they're doing and why. That's kind of almost the whole point of Stoicism. That is, instead of doing things just because, or because other people tell you, or because that's the normal thing to do, or whatever it is. And so you're not supposed to go through life with on autopilot. You're supposed to actually be mindful, thinking about what you're doing and why you're doing, and setting priorities. So that's a major change. People start paying attention, which means that they start doing certain things and not others, that they redirect their efforts and their time, because of course time is limited. We don't live forever. In fact, we don't know how long we're going to live, and therefore, every minute is in fact precious, and you really don't want to spend it. One of the exercises that Greg and I put in the book is one in which you go through a number of activities that you've done over the last few days, and then you ask yourself two questions. The first one is, was this activity actually good for me? Did it improve me as a human being? Did it make me a better person? And the second question is, would I do that on the last day of my life? And it's surprising the kind of things you learn once you start thinking about it in that way. I mean, I guarantee you, very few people get to the end of their life and look back and say, well, I wish I had spent more time on Facebook, right? or answering emails or something like that. It's like, that's not likely. Yeah, that's not likely. So, but nevertheless, we do spend a lot of time on social media and email and stuff like that. And why is that? Because we tend to live our life in a mindless kind of way. We're just not paying attention. So the main change that happens if you start practicing Stoicism is that you're paying attention. There is a technical term that Epictetus uses. It's prosoke, and prosoke literally translates as, it's often translated as mindfulness, but it really translates better as paying attention. So that's a big thing. The other major thing that happens to people is that they become less angry, less irritable. We go back to the concept of magnanimity that we were talking about a minute ago. So one of the big deals in Stoicism, one of the big concepts in Stoicism is that you should never be angry with other people. even if they actually did do something unjust against you. You should never get angry. And the reason you shouldn't get angry is twofold. There's two reasons, really. One, because the Stoic assumption is that people don't do bad things on purpose. They do it because they don't know better. Nobody goes up in the mirror in the morning and says, "Wow, what kind of bad thing can I do today?" Nobody behaves like that. Only cartoon characters behave like that. People do things because they think that they're right. Now they're mistaken often, but they think they're right. They have reasons to do it. And so once you pay attention to that and you appreciate that, you become to be less angry with people. You say, you start treating people as human beings who make mistakes, as opposed to just evil, to be dismissed on the spot. And the second effect of this way of looking at what people are doing is that, and the second reason you shouldn't be and you shouldn't get angry, it's a practical one, because it turns out, empirically speaking, that if you act on the basis of anger, you're probably going to regret it, even if your anger is justified. Even if you're in the right, that those people did something bad to you or something like that, if you act on the basis of anger, you're going to regret it. And the reason for that is because anger, as Seneca put it, is kind of a temporary madness. One of the definitions of anger is that it takes over reason. You can't reason with an angry person. I mean, try. It's just not possible.
It's not going to happen.
Right. And so the Stoics say, look, since it is not right to get angry at other people, and also if you do it, you're going to regret it, because if you act on the basis of anger, you're going to regret it, then you need to start implementing a series of techniques to prevent your anger, or if you do get angry, to disengage. And it turns out that these techniques, which are detailed they're in really great detail, they're listed in very great detail by Seneca in a book called On Anger, or De Ira in Latin. Turns out that those techniques are still valid today. If you check the website of the American Psychological Association and check their treatment of anger management, anger issues, it's pretty much Seneca. It's exactly the same kind of advice that Seneca does. Of course,
great psychologist.
Yeah, exactly. It was a great. The Stoics, and in fact, a lot of the Greek and Romans in general, the ones that we read still today, including Epicurus or Aristotle, they were great intuitive psychologists. They had paid attention to the human mind and to how people behave and why they behave in a certain way. The reason, look, one could easily ask, why the hell are we wasting our time today in the 21st century still reading things that were written more than 2,000 years ago? Well, there's two reasons for that. One, because these people really got some interesting insights into human behavior and human nature, which have not been surpassed yet. In fact, they're being confirmed. A lot of modern research, modern cognitive science actually confirms pretty much what the Stoics and the Epicureans thought about human beings. And the other reason is because human nature hasn't changed. We have definitely made advances in terms of technology, right? So the ancient Stoics were going around with horse and carriage, and we go around with airplanes and automobiles, and they certainly did not have social media and smartphones and things like that. But those are actually superficial differences. The similarities are much more important. We still want the same things. We're still afraid of the same things. We still have the same desires, the same, we go after the same stuff, like money, obviously power, health, power, fame, information. It's all the same stuff. Yeah, it's all the same stuff. I mean, to the point where there are some bits in Seneca, for instance, where it's almost comical, because he's talking about a situation that could easily be applied in the 21st century. Like at some point, he writes a letter to his friend Lucilius, where he says, I've been bothered by all this noise that comes out from the street. I'm trying to write here, and I can't concentrate because there's all these people yelling and making noise in the street. Well, he was describing Rome in the first century, but it could have easily been New York in the 21st century. It's the same thing.
Absolutely.
So we've got the same kind of problems. And so which is why, of course, these ancient philosophies, not just Stoicism, but also Buddhism, and Confucianism, for instance, if you want to draw from the Eastern tradition, that's why they're still useful. It's not, we don't look at Aristotle's physics anymore, and the reason for that is because our physics is far more advanced than Aristotle's. We don't look at Aristotle's biology for the same reason, because our biology is far more advanced. But we do look at ancient ethics, and the reason is because we haven't gotten that much further in ourselves.
And that's it. And at least it's, at the end is what they preach is self mastery, and the way to achieve it through Stoicism.
Yes, to some extent. Although we need to be careful about what we mean by self mastery. So one of the stereotypes about the Stoics is that they are trying to suppress emotions and go through life with a sort of stiff upper lip,
which is wrong.
Yeah, that's not quite right. I mean, there is just like in every stereotype, pretty much there is a grain of truth there, right? It is true that endurance is a Stoic value. I mean, they did say, hey, if there is nothing you can do about a situation, then you just have to endure it. What are your choices? If you start complaining about things you cannot change, then what is the point? You're just going to make yourself feeling worse without actually accomplishing anything. So there is a component of endurance about things. And the thing about emotions, it is true that the Stoics were trying to get away from what they call the negative emotion. They call them the passions, but the term really should be negative emotions. So disruptive emotions such as anger, fear, hatred, things like that. But at the same time, they also said that we need to cultivate positive emotions such as love and joy and a sense of justice. Right? So it's not that they were trying to suppress emotions as much as that they were trying to reorient their emotional spectrum, basically, away from the negative ones, away from the stuff that disrupts your life, and embracing the positive ones, embracing the ones that are actually good for your life and for other people.
And Massimo, talking about the also the values and virtue ethics, how would you say how to start living as a Stoic? Where to start? Like briefly, what's the basics to start?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I would say two things. I would say pick up a good modern book on Stoicism. Obviously, How to Be a Stoic is a possibility, but there are books by other authors like Don Robertson or Bill Irvine. There's a number of other books, or John Sellers. There are a number of other good introductory books to Stoicism. So pick at least one of those so that you have a sort of a general idea of what it is that we're talking about, and especially how to practice it. Then pick at least one of the ancient texts, because you also want to have an idea of where this thing comes from. I would suggest either Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, of course, or Seneca's letters to Lucilius. Those are the two more approachable things. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, my guy is Epictetus, but Epictetus is difficult to read. It's more difficult to read. The discourses are a little bit more advanced, and the manual is not. It's a very condensed summary. So if you don't know anything about Stoicism, that's not a good way to start. It's a great.
You can get lost really easily.
Yeah, exactly. It's a great way to continue once you've started, but that's not a good way to start. So I'd say one or two books from modern Stoics, such as myself or Don Robertson, Sellers, Irvine, and one or two books from the ancient Stoics, particularly Seneca's letters and Marcus Aurelius' Meditations. And then join an online community where you can find advice. There's a major Facebook group on Stoicism that is run by Don Robertson, and then there's a bunch of others that are more specific for certain different countries. Like I run one in Italian, for instance. I don't know if there is one in Spanish, but I wouldn't be surprised. And then, or even better, if you can, see if there is a local Stoa. So see if there is a local group of people who practice Stoicism, because that getting to know people on a personal basis is even better. You get more direct feedback about how to practice and what to read and what to do. Now, if you don't know whether there is a local group in your area, you can go to stoicfellowship.org. I think, the name of the group is Stoic Fellowship, and you can look it up. And there they have a world map basically, and you can click on your area, and they list all known people or groups that are interested in Stoicism in that area. And if you don't find one, then you might want to register with the Stoic Fellowship and start one. because they will let you know. Yeah, they will let you know. If somebody else is interested, they'll put in touch with you.
Thank you. Do you see Massimo, do you see any problem or handicap with Stoicism in today's world? Because we always talk about the shiny part, but is there any handicap or any and also you are a skeptic, so it's good to ask you this question.
Right. No, it's a good question. Yes, I do see some problems, and I've actually written about it on and off. So I think one of the problems is that Stoicism does lend itself to a certain number of misunderstandings. And we talked about the stiff upper lip stuff and suppressing of emotions. It is surprising to me how many people really misunderstand the philosophy and then use it incorrectly. For instance, the most obvious example is that there's a brand of Stoicism in the United States that it's often referred to as Silicon Valley Stoicism because it's popular among entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, computer people and social networks people and stuff like that. And the problem with that is that those are people who are using Stoicism in order to get rich or famous. And it's like, well, no, this is not what it is about. For the Stoics, fame and wealth are what they call preferred indifference, meaning that they are preferred. Sure, if you have them, why not? But they're indifferent, meaning that they don't make you a better person. And the whole point of Stoicism is to make you a better person, not to make you richer or more or famous. It's just to make you a better human being. So I think there is a problem there with certain groups of people that are really misapplying the philosophy. This is not surprising. The same happens with Christianity. There's such a thing as in the United States as the prosperity gospel, which these are people who profess to be Christians, but they tell you that they use Christianity to make money, which is like, it's so bizarre that if Jesus heard something like that, it would come back and beat him on the head. So it's weird, but it's there. It is there, and then there are other people. The same happens to Buddhism. A lot of people, for instance, use meditation to deal with their problems, become more calm, or manage chronic pain and stuff like that. That's great. If it works, there's no problem. But just because you're meditating, and that doesn't make you Buddhist. A Buddhist is not somebody who meditates. A Buddhist is somebody who actually agrees with the ethical precepts, who understands and accepts the Four Noble Truths and follows the Eightfold Path. That is what makes you Buddhist, not the fact that you're meditating. And the same goes with Stoicism. It's like, you can keep a diary, for instance, or you can take a cold shower. But if the reason you're doing that is not to improve as a person, but to impress other people, like if you take a cold shower and you take a selfie to post on your social media and say, hey, look how cool I am, I'm taking a cold shower, you're missing the point there. That's just not good. It's just not Stoicism.
And what would you improve? What would you improve in the Stoic philosophy, and why?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm actually about to finish writing a book just about that.
Interesting.
It's essentially I've been thinking quite a bit about this, and there are a number of things that I think need to be improved or changed. Which again is not surprising. I mean, whenever I say this, it's like people say, "Oh, what do you mean you're changing things?" Well, it's a philosophy that it's almost 2.5 millennia old. You better change something because and the same goes, again, this is not just for Stoicism. Buddhism has changed over the millennia. This is not that modern Buddhism has a variety of different schools and a variety of different ways of approaching things. It's not the same Buddhism that you had 2,000 years ago. The same goes with Christianity. I mean, I know that there are some Christian so-called fundamentalists who think that they're reading the Bible or the Gospels literally, but there's no such a thing as a literal reading of anything. It always needs to be interpreted, particularly because both the Old Testament and New Testament are full of parables and stories that need to be interpreted. You can't take them literally. Literally, they don't mean anything. So you have to interpret them. And of course, interpretation changes over time. Nobody today is a Christian in the way Christians were 2,000 years ago. And that's a good thing. Right?
Yeah, so, this one need to be redesigned, yeah.
Yeah, so the same goes for Stoicism. I mean, certain things need to be updated. And one of the interesting things to me about the Stoics is that they themselves realized that was the case. First of all, they had a lot of discussion internally to the school over centuries with people disagreeing with each other. Posidonius, who was one of the middle Stoics, disagreed with Chrysippus, who was one of the early Stoics. And, Seneca says, I'm going to do my own thing here. I'm not necessarily going to follow what other people say just because they said it. And so there's a tradition in Stoicism of disagreeing and changing things. But my favorite bit is a letter from Seneca, where he says to Lucilius, look, our forerunners, the people that came before us, are not our masters; they're just our teachers. And so we should follow them so long as it's a good thing to follow them. But if we come up with new ideas, if we come up with new ideas and better ways to do things, absolutely, we should do that. So now you asked me specifically what I would change. Well, one big thing that I would change is to do away with some parts of Stoic metaphysics. The Stoics were pantheists, and so they believed that God is the same thing as the universe. It's immanent in the universe, right? And it's made of stuff. It's made of the same stuff that the universe is made of. Now, that's a nice poetic way of looking at things, but it literally doesn't make any sense in terms of modern science, right? So, in fact, they even thought of the universe as a living organism, and which had some implications, because they thought they derived a certain concept of providence, for instance, from this notion of the universe being a living organism, because the universe is doing, the universe is doing whatever it's best for itself, right? As any organism would do, and therefore whatever happens in the world is for the best of the universe, not necessarily for your best, your personal best, but definitely for the best of the universe. Well, that's a lovely idea. Too bad it's false. It doesn't come out of modern science, and I'm a scientist. If it doesn't go well with modern science, I'm afraid you need to throw it out. So the question is, well, and what happens if you do throw it out? What happens if you abandon that notion of the cosmos as a living organism, and therefore the notion of providence that comes out of it? Are you still left with Stoicism? I mean, there's some people that have argued that if you do away with that, then you don't have Stoicism anymore, that those are crucial notions within Stoicism. And I'm arguing in this new book that I'm writing now that that's not the case, that there are some parts of Stoic metaphysics that you can do without, and you should, because they don't make any sense anymore, and yet you can recover a modified version of the ethics that still works. And the major modification, of course, is that the ancient Stoics, if you read Epictetus, for instance, in particular, the ancient Stoics derived a good feeling and a good general attitude toward life from the fact that they lived in a providential universe, right? That things are going to work out for the best at a cosmic level again. And
God will give you this or will take you that.
Well, so it's different from the providence that the Christians are talking about, right? In the case of the Christians, God really loves you directly, personally, right? And so even though you may not realize why God is doing certain things, he's got a plan. And that plan does involve you. In the case of the Stoics, there is no plan that involves you. You are basically a organ of the universe. You're kind of, Epictetus uses the analogy with a foot that steps into the mud, right? And he says, if you're the foot, you're not going to like stepping into the mud. But because you're connected to a body, and the body has to get across the street, and the street is muddy, then it's up to you to get into the mud. Who else is going to do it? The head, the hands? No, it's up to the foot. In that analogy, we are the foot, and the universe is the body, right? So there is a sense of it's you feel better about whatever is happening to you. There is a sense when you have this sense of providence, because I'm stepping in the mud, but there is a cosmic reason for it. Unfortunately, I don't believe that there is a cosmic reason for it. It's just that whatever happens, period. And there's not.
And it happens.
Yeah, it just happens. So what are you going to do as a result as a Stoic? Well, instead of telling yourself that whatever is happening to you, it's for the greater good of the universe, you say to yourself, well, whatever is happening to me, it's neither in my favor nor against me. It's not like the universe is
total equanimity.
Exactly. So we'll go back to equanimity. Exactly. So you develop equanimity and say, look, we live in a world where the universe doesn't care one way or the other. So it's not in my favor, but it's also not against me, right? It's completely neutral, which means that I have to accept the fact that in life, sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. This is just the way it works. And when you win, you be glad. And when you lose, you just accept it because it's part of the way the world actually works. So yes, developing equanimity becomes even more important, I think, for a modern Stoic.
And Massimo, I have 3 questions before the rapid fire questions. So I will ask you the questions briefly. So okay. Go ahead, and I think the interview is super enlightening, at least for me, and I'm sure for all the listeners. So thank you. Before ending, we still a bit to go.
Okay,
Massimo, what's the weirdest Stoic philosopher that has impressed you the most, and why?
Well, definitely Epictetus, and I think that the reason for that is because of the fact that he speaks very clearly. It speaks plain language. You understand exactly what he's saying, and he's blunt. He doesn't mince words. He's just like, it tells it to you like it is. And he talks to his students. I mean, what we have from Epictetus are the discourses and the handbook. In the discourses, he talks to his students quite a bit, and he tells them pretty bluntly. He says at some point, for instance, he says, "Look, you guys come here and you want to study Stoicism, but then I see you out there when you go back to the city and you behave as if you haven't learned anything. So why are you wasting my time? Yeah. So why are you wasting my time here? You're wasting your time and mine." So he's got that kind of thing. He also has is a delightful sense of humor. I mean, one of the first things that I read from Epictetus is from the first volume of the Discourses, where he says, "Sure, someday I'll have to die. Well, if it is today, okay, I'll deal with that. But it doesn't look like it's going to be today, and I'm hungry, so I'd rather go for lunch." It's like this kind of no-nonsense, sort of attitude. It's like, very sure, clever. death, we'll think about it when it comes. Right now we got other things to deal with, like finding a good lunch or something like that. So Epictetus is but he's also, other than the sense of humor and the bluntness and the fact that his language is very clear, he's also he comes across as a genuine human being. He really comes across as somebody who believed what he was saying and was practicing what he was saying. I mean, we don't know much, unfortunately, about his life because one of his students, Arian, wrote a biography of Epictetus, but it's lost, let's say, unfortunately. And so we don't know a lot of details. We only have secondary sources. But we do know that he lived a simple life. He really lived the life that he was preaching essentially to his students. He never married, but then when he was fairly old, he actually took the young child of a friend who would have otherwise been left exposed to die, basically. And we don't know why the child would have been left exposed, possibly because the family couldn't afford to raise him or because he had some kind of physical defect. But Epictetus took the infant and then raised him with the help of a woman. We don't know whether he married the woman or not. But so we get this feeling that he really was a nice person who was trying to do his best. As he says himself in the Discourses, he says, I'm not Socrates, but I would love to die trying to be a Socrates. When death comes, I would like it that she finds me trying to be a Socrates. This is somebody who's modest.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's a beautiful phrase.
Massimo, what's the challenge in today's society, where values and virtue are diminished and undervalued, and
Well, the interesting thing, I think, is that Stoicism, in a sense, is very different from much of what's going on in modern society, right? So modern society is all about fame, and money and consumerism, and which is exactly the opposite of Stoicism. And yet, as you know, and that's why we're talking about it, Stoicism is actually in the resurgence. It's becoming more popular. And not just Stoicism, but also Buddhism and also a number of similar philosophies. And so you got to ask yourself why. And I think the answer is pretty clear. There's research that shows that consistently over the last several decades, that while people's material conditions have improved, right? We have more wealth, we live better lives, and so on and so forth. People are not more happy. The degree of happiness has stayed the same over the last several decades. So that is a paradox, right? So we tend to think in a capitalist society, in a consumerist society, we are told that what makes us happy is to have stuff, to buy things, to be able to afford, vacations and things like that. And yet in reality, the reality is that research in psychology is pretty clear. That's not the kind of stuff that makes us happy. Now the Stoics would not have been surprised, and neither would have the Buddhists, right? And so I think that the resurgence of Stoicism, Buddhism, and similar philosophies is precisely because people are, at least some people, an increasing number of people, is beginning to figure out that we've been sold a bad idea. That this notion that we need to get more and more stuff and more money, and then we need to be famous for 5 minutes a day or 10 minutes a day. This is all actually empty. It's not leading anywhere. It's not making us better, and it's not making our lives actually better. So I think that's a main reason why Stoicism is so popular these days.
And Massimo, almost everyone talks about Seneca, Marco Aurelio, Epictetus, sometimes Diogenes, but we forgot sometimes about Cato, Rufus, Cicerone,
yes.
Heraclitus. Can you tell us briefly about those Stoics and why some more that we tend to ignore that needs to be reminded of?
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. And the answer for why people don't talk much about those is because we don't have a lot, unfortunately, left from their writings, right? So Musonius Rufus, who was Epictetus' teacher, actually left a few lectures and a few fragments. You can read those in basically a couple of hours, and you're done, or even less. Hierocles left only fragments. He was a 2nd century Stoics. We have almost nothing of the early Stoics, like Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoics. We basically have nothing, only a few quotes here and there from secondary sources. Chrysippus wrote a bunch of books. Not a single one has survived. We only have fragments. So there's reasons why we don't talk about those. It's because we just don't know much about them. The little we do know, however, should probably be appreciated. I mean, a good source for that is Diogenes Laertius' book, The Lives and Opinions of the Eminent Philosophers. Book 7 of The Lives and Opinions is about the Stoics, and Diogenes tells you some interesting stories and some interesting ideas about Zeno, Chrysippus, and a few others. Now, the big exception here is Cicero, because from Cicero we actually do have a lot. We have a significant amount of writing. But Cicero was not a Stoic. He was an academic skeptic. He belonged to a different school. And however, he was very sympathetic to Stoicism. And so he wrote a lot about Stoicism. And I absolutely am convinced that Cicero should be appreciated in his own right, for one thing, because he was a great writer and a great statesman and a pretty good philosopher. So people should read Cicero, period, just because he's Cicero. But also, if you're interested in Stoicism, you should read a few books by Cicero. The most important one is On the Ends of Good and Evil, where in books 2 and 3 of that, the chapters 2 or 3 basically of that book, he talks about Stoicism. The Stoic Paradoxa, which is a short treatise about some unusual notions within Stoicism, which Cicero calls paradoxes. The Tusculan Disputations, which is a series of essays that he wrote when he was in his villa in Tusculum and outside of Rome, and most of them talk about Stoic philosophy, and they explain a number of things about Stoic philosophy. So there's a large number of writings by Cicero, and I think there is a little bit of an effort. I'm certainly making a little bit of an effort on my own to have people reconsider Cicero and reread Cicero, because he had a lot to say, and he was a fascinating figure in his own right. I mean, he lived right at the end of the Republic, surrounded by these larger-than-life individuals like Julius Caesar, Octavian, who became the first emperor, Mark Antony, Cleopatra, Pompey. And it's unbelievable, the number of people, the the kinds of people that Cicero interacted with was stunning. So Cicero is definitely worth in its own right.
Worth studying, yes. Worth studying.
Yeah.
Thank you for the extension of the philosophers. And now heading to rapid fire questions.
Okay.
We are heading towards the end of the interview. Massimo, what's your favorite book?
That's a good question. At this point, I would have to say Epictetus Enchiridion, the manual, the handbook.
This is I read so many times.
Yes, exactly.
I've recommended so many times in Spain that there is in Spain is a house called Casa del Libro, house book. So they just call me saying, don't recommend more these books because we run out all these books, man. So it's been so
that's great. It's
the book I've recommended the most.
Yes, that's my favorite book.
What's your favorite author?
Oh, that's a difficult question because, it's hard to have one. I mean, there's so many. But let's say among the ones that I read more recently, then it would have to be Seneca. And that's because his writing is so beautiful. He's like, if you can read Latin, that would be ideal because his Latin is beautiful. But even in translation, in fact, I've heard colleagues telling me that it's almost impossible to translate badly Seneca because the language is so clear and so beautiful that it's like, you cannot have a bad translation of Seneca. So yeah, that would be my choice.
What rule would you change in today's world?
What rule would I change? Probably the notion that we should have rules in the first place. I think that life is too complicated to have rules, and that we should be a little bit more flexible. In fact, that's one of the advantages of virtue ethics over the other kinds of approaches to ethics that can be found in modern moral philosophy. The other two major ones are utilitarianism, the notion that we should always try to maximize most people's happiness and decrease most people's pain, and deontology, Kantian deontology, the notion that there are, in fact, universal rules like the categorical imperative that should dictate what we do. And one of the advantages of the Stoics and the other schools in virtue ethics is that they realized already more than 2.5 millennia ago that life is just too damn complicated for rules. So rule number one for me would be there are no rules. You just have to look at each situation and figure out what's the best way forward.
Thank you so much. And what's your most valuable item right now?
You mean in terms of actual, sort of monetary value, or the one that I care the most about?
Or utilitarian, right?
Yeah.
Useful, maybe?
Useful, maybe. I don't have anything that is useful that I particularly care about because, useful things can be replaced. But I do have a Roman lamp from the 2nd century. That is from the time which Epictetus was alive. It's not very valuable, meaning that it costs a few $100s, but it's one of my favorite objects. I'm looking at it right now. It's near my desk, and it's one of those things that you occasionally pick up and think, wow, this thing was being used by actual people, like almost 2,000 years ago.
And the ones we are studying right now.
Yeah, and now we are exactly the same kind of people we're studying right now, and now here I have it in my apartment in New York, thousands of miles away, and 2,000 years later.
Continuing with the rapid fire questions, what's your passion outside Stoicism? What's another passion for you?
Writing, for sure. I mean, I spend a lot of time writing about all sorts of things. I mean, you mentioned in the beginning, I write about skepticism, modern skepticism. I write about pseudoscience. Obviously, I write about general philosophy, but just writing in general. I mean, there's not a single day that passes that I don't write.
Not a thing. I like it. What's the song you've listened to the most? You can recall?
Probably, I would say Monty Python's Life, The Bright Side of Life. It's the song that they sing at the end of Life of Brian, the movie. And it's the one that says, look at the bright side of things. And the funny thing, of course, is that when they're singing this, they're all on crucifixes. They're being crucified. Right? But they're singing these happy songs like, look at the bright side of life.
Estoicism.
Yeah, it's a really funny song, and it's a great group of comedians anyway.
What philosopher you would like to become? If you had to choose one, which one will be your role model?
Well, that would have to be Epictetus. I mean, there's no question about it.
Yeah. Your biggest dream, Massimo?
To pretty much keep living the kind of life that I'm living now, surrounded by good friends, good family, loving wife, and in a great place like New York, doing what I love to do.
Precious.
So I guess it's not a dream; it's really a reality.
It's really a reality. And what's been your biggest failure?
My biggest failure has been not to realize this, not to understand that there was a better way of doing things until fairly late in my life. Right, all these changes that we talked about happened when I was in my late 40s and early 50s, and I wish that they somehow had happened before, because I made a number of mistakes, like everybody does. I mean, we're not talking about any major things here, but a lot of mistakes that could have been avoided. My life could have been that of a better human being had I found this path a few decades earlier. But then again, one of the Stoic notions is that there's no sense in regretting things, because you have no control over the past. So the past is control. Yeah, exactly. The past is gone, and there's nothing you can do about it. So there's no sense in sort of regretting things.
And what's the thing you feel most proud of?
My books, I suppose, and in terms of sort of what the general public can see, and in personal terms, I guess my daughter, who is growing up to be a smart and successful young woman.
Yeah, congratulations. And what will be your final message for anyone who is listening this podcast and also listening your experience and learning from you? What will be your final message?
This is not going to surprise you that much. I think that the final message should be that some things are up to us and other things are not up to us, and realizing the difference between the two and focusing on the first and accepting the second with equanimity is the key to a good life.
It makes the whole difference. Is there anything you'd like to add, Massimo?
No, just thank you for having me.
And our pleasure. Where people can find you online, so to know more about you?
My main presence online is on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @mpigliucci, MPIGLIUCCI. And I also have a place online, which is basically where you can find everything that I do, everything that I write, all my books and everything else. And that is Massimo Pigliucci, just one word, @wordpress.com.
Massimo, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, knowledge, experience with all the listeners and with me. We are super blessed to have you, and good luck with your life. It's a really great example on how to live a good life, and also it's inspiring us to follow this new Stoic path. And I'm sure it does, at least for me, a lot, and I'm sure for a lot of listeners. Congratulations, and we will be paying attention to your next launchings and promoting it and put it on the show notes, and trying to spread the word out here in Spain and also in the Latin community.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Bye, Massimo. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Esto ha sido Disrupt Everything by Isra García. Encuentra el riesgo antes de que el riesgo te encuentre a ti.
Hey, gracias por llegar hasta aquí, por escuchar este podcast ver este vídeo y sumarte a la Liga del 1%, esa que marca la diferencia en el 99% restante. Gracias por tú, tal y como eres, tal y como ocurres. Te reto y te incito a que utilices una sola cosa de lo que has escuchado, visto en este podcast para tu vida, para impactar, para servir, para jugar, para practicar, para amar, para vivir, que es para lo que estamos aquí. Trabajar con excelencia, sí. Producir con excelencia, sí. Pero vivir con excelencia. Si esto ha resonado contigo, te espero en los nuevos episodios. Te espero en la Liga del 1%, la comunidad que poco a poco voy a empezar a construir con muchas cosas que no voy a desvelar, pero vas a vivir, tanto presenciales como online, tanto para tu vida, como para tu profesión, como para tu familia, como para tus negocios. Puedes suscribirte abajo en la descripción. Y un favor, voy a pedirte que si escuchas este podcast en YouTube, que vayas a Spotify o Apple Podcast, si utilizas alguno de ellos, te suscribas al podcast y dejes una valoración y una reseña, porque eso nos ayudará a llegar a todavía más personas. Este podcast ha alcanzado más de 6 millones de escuchas y más de 300.000 descargas al mes. Mi trabajo es seguir haciéndolo sin publicidad, sin pretender obtener nada más que esto. Para mí la acción, hacerlo, estar aquí es la propia realización, es el propio resultado, la propia recompensa. El haber impactado a cientos de miles de personas que ya están reinventándose a sí mismas. Si no utilizas ninguna de estas dos plataformas, deja un comentario aquí de qué te ha parecido, de cómo lo has vivido. Es importante porque tú cuentas, porque todo cuenta, porque cada instante es la gran victoria. Cada ser vivo es la gran victoria, cada uno de nosotros, cada movimiento, cada pensamiento, aunque no lo creamos, es la gran victoria de las victorias. Gracias, y vamos a seguir haciendo que las cosas sucedan, bailando con el momento, reinventándonos y utilizando la disrupción positiva para cambiar todo lo que importa. Vamos a ello.